Hello and welcome to the Emerging Purpose podcast with me, Greg Donaldson. This is episode 9 with Jocelyn Rose. So here we are, the first episode of 2024. Feeling positive, feeling driven, feeling excited, feeling cold. I'm currently walking out in Stanmore Woods with another little doggy friend called Ottie, who's a Sprockapoo. And she's quite an old Sprockapoo, and she's come to stay with me for a couple of weeks. And so she's taking me out for a walk in this bright, sunny, sunshine January day. It's currently the 18th of January, and the sun is still pretty high in the sky. I reckon we've got about an hour left, and it's fresh and cold, probably about 3 degrees maybe. And I'm feeling pretty good. January is usually quite a difficult place. I think this week typically is known, I think especially the Monday is like known as one of the hardest, what do they call it, Blue Monday. So I always try to make a little bit of an extra effort to not really let that be the case, and put some practices in that kind of help that. Yeah, so my mate Dev alerted me to a little hot yoga introductory offer, 20 quid for 2 weeks of hot pod yoga, they call it. I think it's like a new franchise. Really funny. You go to this kind of building, it's down in Hove. I think they're all over the country. You go in and there's this big tent that's been blown up, and they heat it right up to 37 degrees. And you go in there and do a bit of yoga. I'm really bad at yoga, but I quite like sitting in hot rooms and saunas and sweat lodges. Which reminds me, I must tell you at the end of the episode about some upcoming events to do with sweat lodges in Stanmore Park, in fact. So I will remind myself to tell you about that. Anyway, hope you guys are doing alright. End of 2023, difficult few months. I was in a play actually by Alan Ayckbourn, called Bedroom Farce, and that was at the New Venture Theatre in Brighton, and that was a lot of fun to be in. That was the beginning of December, but there was a lot of sadness around as well. My friend Dave and the Pepper family, who were like my kind of adopted family, or they adopted me, lost their son Mark, Dave's brother Mark Pepper, who was one of the loveliest men that I knew, and it was a big loss for the whole community actually. He's such a lovely guy, and actually then going to his funeral and wake, just showed how loved he was and how influential he was in people's lives. So I'm going to dedicate this episode to Mark. What a lovely man. Yeah, so in this episode I basically recorded back in I think it was August 23, that's right. And I sat down in my flat with Jocelyn Rose. So Jocelyn, she works as a research therapist on psychedelic assisted therapy clinical trials. And she also works as a therapist in private practice, is a clinical supervisor, an independent researcher and an author. So she's a pretty busy woman. Her specialist interest is in exploring the unfolding potential of EMDR as a scalable, trauma-focused psychedelic-assisted therapy. Get this, she's a beekeeper and a mother with a keen interest in the healing properties of the natural world. Yeah, so as you can imagine, our talk covered quite a lot of ground. We went into a bit of the academic side, we went a bit into the EMDR, a bit into the psychedelics, and we covered a little bit of the bees as well. And Joss was so lovely, she brought along a fresh pot of honey that she had got from her bees that morning, and it was still in the I don't know what you call it, I guess the wax, the it was still there, just like fresh honeycomb. That's it, honeycomb. And and I've been dining on my breakfasts have been dining out on that honey for the last few months. So thanks, Joss. Anyway, I'll be back at the end to tell you about a few events that I wanted to tell you about, the Sweat Lodge, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with myself and Jocelyn Rose. What are you interested in at the moment? Are you reading anything?
I'm always reading something. Yeah. So at the moment, I have got the Psychedelic Integration by Mark. I think I pronounce his name Axilia.
Oh yeah, I just bought that as well.
Yeah. So it was a new one. I think it was published last year, and I've got it as a reading group nomination. So been pushing my way through that and enjoying it.
Do you tend to go for more academic books, or do you ever read fiction? Or
occasionally read fiction. I have to say that since doing kind of client work and psychotherapy, I find perhaps fiction a little bit less it's too much like the day job. I find myself just interpreting people and
do you?
Yeah, and kind of less focused on the storyline, more around my own process with what might be going on for them. So my appetite for fiction has really dropped off since doing private practice.
You psychoanalyse your
book
fictional characters.
Same with watching movies as well. It's like my appetite for. I mean, it's too much like the day job.
Really?
I love my work, but I kind of. I'm less occupied with the story and more occupied with my process. So just noticing kind of preferences have changed.
So tell us about your job. What do you do? I mean, I know what you do, but I'd like to hear you tell me about what you do.
That's a good question.
What do you enjoy? What do you like to do?
I'm definitely one of the lucky people who has followed my heart and my passion and ended up in a career that I love. And I genuinely I love my work. Yeah. It feels like absolute privilege. So predominantly I work in private practice as a psychotherapeutic counsellor. Yeah. And also a clinical supervisor. I use a lot of EMDR in my practice, so I'm quite trauma focused in the way that I work. And alongside this, I also work on a couple of clinical research trials based here in the UK. So I'm working currently on the DMT for depression and also the 5-MeO DMT research trials that are going on here.
So there's so much there already. So I'd be really interested to hear. So so you're a psychotherapist, you work in private practice.
Yes.
And so let's start there. What made you want to become a therapist? I mean, it's a big question.
It is a big question. Like many people, a myriad of different experiences. I'd spent quite a considerable amount of time teaching A-level psychology, so I had a foundation in that, and also sort of GCSE. There's a foundation degree, and really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed kind of the research component. There's a lot of science in it, but finding, particularly when I kind of took students through kind of pastoral parts of their education, you know, kind of my role as a personal tutor and also EPQ supervisor. I kind of wanted to be perhaps a little bit more clinical than I was trained to be. I did some solution-focused counselling skills stuff while I was still in post, and then I took a maternity leave And during my maternity leave, the college that I was working for, the FE college, very kindly put me on my request, put me on the counselling skills level 2 training as my CPD for that year. You could do any of the college courses free of charge as your kind of CPD teaching requirement.
Oh, wow, right.
And that worked out really well for me because coming back post maternity leave, personal situation had changed, and yeah, it was time for a career shift. So around that time, kind of moved house. I was kind of flying solo with 3 kids.
Wow.
So it was kind of either I go back into working full time, but that wasn't possible because young baby, I was homeschooling, so
homeschooling as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so the commitments that I had just weren't conducive to working full time. So
so that was you coming out of teaching.
Well, yeah, kind of. I dipped my toe back in for about another 5 years, but in different situations. So I worked for a local independent school at Rodine, teaching psychology A level for 5 more years later, because I kind of did a mixture of private practice and teaching at that point. But like it was just kind of one of those things where there was a crescendo, and it was like I need to take some time out, consolidate. What can I do with that time? I'm quite a kind of intellectual person, so I saw it as an opportunity and threw everything that I had at retraining. So yeah, I had to kind of juggle things for a couple of years, but made it work. And yeah, so my kind of transition into psychotherapy was I suppose in a sense an opportunity, but also it kind of felt like it was time for a shift.
So there was something going on in your life where it sort of sounds like a different.
It was unsustainable,
right?
Yeah, teaching with a very young family is unsustainable. And so
was it something that you always wanted to do, teaching? I mean, was that kind of part of your purpose?
I'm naturally inquisitive, and quite academic. It wasn't necessarily kind of on my my go-to, but I had children quite young, and it was something that I could do that was quite intellectual. It was a good profession to be in, and it was also something that I could do that helped me to. I mean, I love learning, so continuing to learn was really kind of my priority. It just so happened that teaching fitted with that.
Amazing. So it sounds like you had quite a long time with that, actually. There's something that kind of fitted for you.
And I loved working with young people. I loved my subject.
Teaching psychology.
Teaching psychology, yeah.
Yeah, so it sort of makes sense, actually, then, as a thread through into becoming a psychotherapist.
Yeah, but if I kind of backtrack a little bit further than that, originally, I suppose you said, had I always wanted to be a teacher? I'd wanted to go and do medicine. I had a place to study to become a doctor, but flunked my chemistry A level. I think I was having too much fun. And so went and did a medical biology degree, kind of specialising in molecular genetics.
Wow.
With the view that I could pick up medicine. And there was a conversion course you could basically do to do that. So I did that at Sussex Uni. Started to do research at the end of my degree. So I started to do a DPhil, like a PhD, in embryology, and then fell pregnant. So I already had a little bit of teaching from my time as a PhD student, and so picking that up and going with that. So then I did kind of teaching conversion and did a PGCE. Did that for a number of years, and then obviously kind of second career, as so many of us psychotherapists are, kind of converted over to that about a decade later. So
wow,
bit of a story. And
what a journey, I mean, it's very, very academic as well. Like you say, you've obviously got this academic background. Is that something you've always had, or you've kind of got this leaning towards?
Yeah. I'd say kind of a science or an evidence-based background.
Right.
There's an Einstein quote that really resonated with me, though, that kind of that cross or intersect between science and spirituality, where forgive me if I get it wrong, but essentially I'll give you the essence of it. But spirituality without science is blind, and science without spirituality is meaningless.
Nice.
And so I quite like that that intersect between the two, and then I find myself kind of emerging into a career which really is at the forefront of both of those.
Yeah, so it's all converging. And
it's a sweet spot, Greg.
You found the
sweet spot. Yeah,
well, that's nice to hear.
Yeah,
Someone who's found the sweet spot. I mean, I always find that when I find the sweet spot, I'm kind of a bit like, yes, finally. And then about a week later, I'm like, where's it gone again? Because it's always that thing of like you find. Well, I talked to quite a few people about purpose and whether it's a useful concept actually, and but actually hearing you say that, it's like, yeah, it's interesting when you find these places in your life and then it all changes again,
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's hard to stand there and take a perspective, but it sounds like you're enjoying it while it's there. Not saying it's going to disappear, but I'm just
well, I think that kind of unfolding that really resonates. That those layers, that kind of locust flower or petals of the rose or whatever that is. Yeah.
So you enjoy working in private practice? That's kind of something you like doing, and
it's a real privilege. Yeah, it feels.
What do you mean privilege? Why is it a privilege?
It's a privilege because I'm only ever going to know what the human experience is from a white, relatively middle class, heteronormative perspective, and I feel that in really sitting beside somebody in their process, I get to experience sort of lots of different versions of the human experience, and being really present with that is it's like a little window into living different lives, and it helps to kind of broaden my perspective of I guess what it means to be human. And for me that's such a sort of a powerfully unique experience, kind of consciousness, and that relational potential, that someone would share that with me, feels like a real gift. I
totally agree.
Privilege.
I mean, sometimes it's unbelievable, isn't it? You sort of feel like, wow, this person has got to a point where they really do trust to share this with me. And actually there's something in the kind of field between a therapist and a client that actually is like, it's just two human beings actually working something out, and something's kind of emerging from that relationship, which is kind of strangely alchemical and magical.
And a two-way process too. That kind of that shared growth that I'm certainly not an expert in what it is to be someone else, and really kind of finding my way with that. It's almost like sort of trying to play different instruments. Like each person has a sort of different flavour of the way that you work with them. And the version that I become with those different people changes and really kind of knowing myself well enough so that I can notice those sort of nuanced differences, those subtleties, and use that for kind of repositioning myself in that work and hopefully bringing about some therapeutic change. Yeah,
it's quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, I've recently did a supervision course that kind of focused on the archetypal aspects of therapy and actually how it can be really useful for the therapist to think about themselves as what archetype is kind of needed in this moment with this person. So it's almost like you become a kind of, you could stretch out of your own comfort zone having to mentor, or not mentor, but you kind of know what I mean, like sort of shine the thing that maybe is missing for that client and having to show it through yourself somehow archetypally. And it's like, wow, that again, there's something in that I find quite meaningful and magical, you know.
I've really that really resonates with me in terms of the supervisory relationship too, and the kind of the transpersonal elements of the supervision process. I guess my supervision practice is really kind of, I use a lot of the Hawkins and Shohei 7-eyed model, and the transpersonal is the kind of the overarching, the kind of the seventh eye, if you like, through which to
I've not heard of that model. What's it called?
Hawkins and Shohei 7-eyed model. So, yeah, finding that has that's kind of framed my my perspective quite a lot, and I noticed that both my therapy and my supervision processes are becoming more and more transpersonal as time goes on.
So and how do you notice that? Is there a way that you sort of, is that intuition or?
Definitely those sort of synchronicities, those intuitive felt senses, noticing within my body. It's been interesting with EMDR because often I'll feel like a powerful sensation or urge to like move a leg or something, and then in the session the client who's reprocessing some trauma, their leg will move. Or kind of there's a big window in the rooms that I work, and there'll be like a pertinent moment, and like there'll be a clap of thunder, or a fox will jump into the garden, or these things that we could so easily dismiss, but when we actually look at the kind of the context with which they are presenting themselves, there's almost a sort of a strange parallel, and we could dismiss it, or we could kind of use that as a way of kind of enhancing our understanding of the process that's going on, and it might sound a little woo. I
love it. I'm all over that stuff. Yeah, I mean it sort of reminds me of that kind of Jungian story of the bird flying into the window, and the client just thinks it's a bird flying into a window, but kind of Jung knows more. There's something else to make meaning from that. It sort of also reminds me. I was sitting here in my living room here with a client, and the car alarms start going off, and it's like alarm bells are ringing. What is that? And actually there's something about noticing those things that actually just take you into a place that is a little bit kind
deep
of
really quickly with that content, and get around some of the defense mechanisms too, and I think that's wonderful, and magical, if I'm
but I suppose what I hear is like, so it's about noticing the transpersonal is kind of like listening and including everything that's in the moment that's
certainly
happening.
expanding awareness, and that perhaps sort of segues a little bit into the psychedelic work as well. It's not necessarily that the situation changes, but our kind of consciousness expands to include some of this stuff. So maybe that's kind of the start point. I kind of read that and thought, I want to retrain as a therapist.
Okay. But it sounds like you were sort of aware that there's something going on here. Well, you said transcendental.
Yeah.
So do you mean a kind of like spiritual emergency type thing? Something?
Yeah, I would say it was emergence. I was still remained very functional in my life.
Right.
I was very kind of, grounded, working, homeschooling, kind of cracking on. But I found a place sort of deep within myself where I had, again, struggling with words even now, I had kind of a universal capacity for love, and it didn't matter what was kind of literally or figuratively thrown at me in my life. I'd kind of experienced a kind of an expanded state of consciousness where I could kind of return it with this kind of unconditionality. And around this time I was running quite a few enrichment trips to places like Auschwitz near Krakow in Poland. So groups of like 30 kids would take them over there. Went to another we had a series of those, and then to Uganda, again kind of a lot of kind of really kind of interesting kind of historical, psychological expansion in terms of perhaps some of the shadow aspects of the human experience.
Right.
And yeah, whatever was kind of going on in my kind of personal, professional, intellectual, spiritual development, I kind of kept coming back to this position of non-dualism. And I tried to sort of frame it through New Age spirituality, which took me so far, but I found that there was almost a sense of I don't know how to put it other than a kind of spiritual elitism. That's not quite right, but
you mean in the New Age scene?
In certain kind of that what was happening to me kind of felt it was almost, I guess, my own relationship with dealing with trauma, but and a sort of perhaps a dissociative response, or that's how I kind of frame it now. But it wasn't quite the right language,
right.
And I couldn't quite put my finger on why it wasn't right, and I hadn't got to these places through endless meditation.
Right.
And,
it was here.
And I think
it arrived.
It was like something went off in my brain, and it arrived, and I was there, and I couldn't turn it back off again. And I think, I speak about the kind of the elitism stuff. I think that perhaps people who've traveled a spiritual path through hours of endlessly meditating were perhaps I won't say judgmental, but that's not quite right, but they kind of perhaps weren't quite aligned with how or what could have happened to me.
It didn't happen in
happen in a conventional, in the right way.
Yeah, the right way, yeah.
And I was sort of accessing these quite compelling, transformative shifts without the meditation, without the framework, and so yeah, I coming back in from that, I made significant life changes, which I've spoken to a little bit already in terms of career shifts, that sort of thing, and really kind of to integrate those experiences, which I think going out of my body to those non-dual experiences was blissful and wonderful. Coming back sort of 9 months later and crawling back into my life was like really difficult.
So you were out
quite a while.
9 months.
Yeah, quite a while.
Wow. But you also knew there was something keeping your feet on the ground as well, because you were kind of researching it and.
Well, I was also 5 months pregnant, so.
5 months pregnant. Oh my God.
Yeah, so feet were definitely firmly on the ground and needed to be for good measure. And I, got a huge, I think, in terms of grounding, children do a wonderful job, at that. So
So you couldn't kind of fly off into realms of fantasy and disappear.
I had to keep on showing up. So feet firmly planted on the ground, but head up in the heavens. It was a real kind of like stretching out. And so when my head came back down into the kind of the lived reality, obviously some integration needed to happen.
Integration.
So then, really, I suppose I see now that the psychotherapy course was really part of my integrating those experiences. And I would say that, that integration process is ongoing, but really, I would say probably it's probably about 5 years to really kind of get my life back into a place of real kind of solidity again. So I kind of see it now like a very kind of long, slow psychedelic experience where it took me perhaps a decade for an ego death, 9 months of transcendence, and then sort of like, some real sort of graft of integration for about 5 years. But so it's
well, it sounds like it's kind of in the right order, and that you've kind of, but there's a time. It's interesting, isn't it, in the sort of psychedelic world, or this renaissance is bringing a lot of people who think they can have a psychedelic and then it's like, oh yeah, and then I'll just like integrate it over a couple of days or something, have an integration session with someone and it's done. And actually, it's just, hearing you say 5 years, it's like, it's kind of ongoing, isn't it? Integration's always ongoing to some degree.
I have to say that I suppose those experiences, I mean, they're definitely life-shaping, but it wasn't then until 2018, I think it was. It was shortly after the Pollan book got released. I had a read of that, and
so the Michael Pollan How to Change Your Mind.
I said, that's what happened to me.
Oh right!
I finally had a framework for it.
It gave you a framework.
It gave me a framework, and I was like, I had that. I had an ego death, and then of course once you start, you pick up the end of the rope and you just read and read and read. And then kind of Jack Cornfield's After the Ecstasy, the Laundry was really helpful. The Groffian stuff with the perinatal matrices, kind of training myself. Getting involved with the Institute of Psychedelic Therapy, who have been
more on them as well.
Really, really wonderful community. And one of the things I suppose from, and also subsequently my own experiences using psychedelics and going to some really familiar places to me, but doing it in a safe, structured, therapeutic way.
So kind of held, but recognisable.
Really recognisable, yeah.
Really, right.
Yeah, really similar.
Yeah.
Familiar, but without the wider kind of risk and discourse. So it feels, I say safe loosely, but it feels...
but there's something being held,
more
there's
controlled.
A container,
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Wow, so hang on, where do we go in here? Right, so you had this experience, and it kind of big part of your life, big experience, and then a kind of 5 years of integrating whilst you're also training as a psychotherapist, and then the Michael Pollan book is kind of the catalyst, or it's more of like an understanding. Oh, that's kind of what that's something I understand and I know about.
I mean, I'd had being part of the kind of the Brighton community, you can't escape the use of psychedelics, and so I was aware that other people were having altered states experiences, but I think it was starting to kind of really read about it that gave me the confidence. And another thing as well, I suppose, is that kind of uncloseting that happens as a therapist, as an individual, that kind of how much of our personal content do we share, our own stories, and I had a bit of an imposter syndrome thing going on to begin with, feeling like am I bona fide because I don't have a drug taking history, and I was in my late 30s by the time I had my first psychedelic experience.
So I'm quite jealous of that.
I had some good tools to integrate it.
Well, that's it. You're kind of like, you're an adult.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And actually, there's something about knowing oneself before kind of blasting.
And an excellent set and setting as well, with some treasured colleagues, and kind of legitimate use. And I also recognise that as the field expands, there'll be many people who have a variety of different experiences. Some who have, a flowery history and relationship with psychedelics, and others who don't. And finding a broad enough kind of church, for want of a better word, but a broad church where actually all experiences are really welcome, and it's not necessarily about like the quantity, but also the quality of how we work with these experiences that kind of matters.
Yeah, we've come to such an interesting place in the sort of timeline, haven't we, in terms of like how psychedelics come back in, and then especially in research. I sort of have this kind of feeling that the substances themselves know how much they want to be researched, and actually, I mean, again, that could sound really woo-woo or whatever, but
bring on the transpersonal.
Yeah. But you kind of get this sense with mushrooms. It's like mushrooms are just kind of like colonizing us. They're like a sort of big cordyceps who just want to take over. They were probably the first thing, here on this planet, and they'll probably be the last thing.
I'm always kind of fascinated by those occasions on the trials where data collection, such as blood pressure, for example, or taking bloods, isn't possible for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I'm always curious about, what might be going on in that person's process at that moment where they can't get the bloods out yet. Half an hour after dosing, they got plenty available through the same cannula.
Yeah.
What's that about?
What is that about? Yeah. Yeah. And it's quite odd, isn't it? I believe we worked in the same place, probably with different substances, but it's really odd, isn't it? Kind of, I don't know. Is it odd? I found it quite odd. Turning up to this kind of research centre, kind of looks like a hospital, essentially. And there's these substances being used on subjects. And it's kind of like, one part of me is like, this is completely wrong. Like, why would you want to do anything in this kind of atmosphere, linked up with cannulas and blood, heart monitors and the rest of it? It just seems like, wow, is this where I'd want to experience it? But then I kind of get this feeling, well, actually, if you don't know, then some people kind of like being in that environment because they've not had the experience, so they want to be surrounded by.
We have to remember too that for some, again, I'm using the word church, but for some, science and the kind of medical research setting is their kind of their experience or their belief system, and the medical model, and so kind of really widening participation so that all experiences are welcome.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it may not be for all. However, it's compelling when there are some significant shifts in well-being as a consequence of these compounds being used in medical research facilities, CROs, and yet we may kind of feel that they are suboptimal or less than perfect, but they're certainly good enough in that context. Yeah,
I mean, I've certainly worked with some, they call them subjects, don't they? Subjects who, even the wording gets me a little bit like, subjects, what? But who've had incredibly transformational experiences, like, especially with Ibogaine, there was like, this very long experience, and there was one guy who just sat for about 17 hours, like absolutely still, and you wouldn't know that anything was really happening to him. But actually doing the integration work afterwards, he was telling me about how this golden ball of light of intelligence was just scanning through his body, bit by bit, part by part, just gently going through. And then it got to a part in him that he'd been having troubles with in his groin for years and years, and this kind of golden light hovered over it and then withdrew and then waited and built up some power and then went for it into this painful bit and just stayed like that for a couple of hours until it was healed and moved on. And you think, well, it's incredible that that's come out of an experience in a medical research centre, with this substance that's going to possibly be used for heroin, intervention heroin addiction.
Yeah, opiate addiction. It is fascinating, and I suppose that's kind of something that we haven't yet spoken to, which is I suppose about my own personal kind of interests in terms of the field and the psychedelic scene, and one of the things that I'm really kind of aware of, I suppose, in terms of my own process around kind of psychedelic elitism or spiritual elitism, is how do we widen participation, and rather than kind of casting a kind of judgment over like an ideal, optimal or less optimal, I suppose, how can we support as many people as possible to have good enough experiences as possible, and part of that comes the issue of scalability. How do we bring about delivery of these substances outside of either kind of, you know, new age spiritual settings or clinical research facilities or kind of retreat settings, which again there's an elitism there because not everyone is able to travel abroad, and so I guess my kind of personal interest, and I'm writing with a treasured colleague, Hannah Rain Smith, around how might we use EMDR as a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy to provide scalable treatments for individuals.
Amazing.
So yeah, I mean, I could probably do like a season of podcasts on this.
Yeah, well, I'd love to hear a little bit more, just in terms of if people don't really know what I've got a little bit of an idea what EMDR is.
So, or perhaps I can put a bit of context first. So one of the things that is coming up in the research from substance misuse is that people who have increased numbers of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, have an increasing chance of experiencing adverse drug effects, whether that be from opiates or from psychedelics. So that piece of research hasn't been tailored for psychedelic therapy, but it can be extrapolated. And in 2022, forgive me, I can't remember the name of the researcher. I'd need to look it up. Perhaps we can put it in the links of the chat.
Show notes.
But in that piece of research, it's quite compelling that for each additional ACE or adverse childhood experience, there was a 10% increase in adverse drug experiences. And so if we take that at face value, we need to recognise that trauma and complexity need to be accommodated for in working with these substances, so that the people who are most at risk of adverse childhood experiences, such as people who come from impoverished backgrounds or perhaps have a traumatized parent or incarcerated parent or an alcoholic parent or an absent parent, so that those who are most at risk are able to access these treatments irrespective of the likelihood of adverse drug effects. And so really this all comes down to stabilization, and how do we improve a subject, participant, patient, client, whatever you want to say, how do we improve their stability so that they can access psychedelic therapy. And EMDR is a wonderful tool. It's a trauma-focused therapy, so it's an exposure therapy that was designed by a lady called Francine Shapiro back in the 80s in the States, and she noticed that as she was walking one day in the park, her eyes were tracking as they do when you walk along, and as her eyes tracked, she noticed that she started thinking and feeling differently about what had been on her mind. And she posited what she later called the adaptive information processing hypothesis, which is basically as we reprocess information, we start to think and feel differently about those same experiences. And so she developed an intervention called eye movement desensitization reprocessing. However, we've later learned that it doesn't have to be eye movements, but essentially it's anything that bilaterally stimulates the brain. So we're looking for interhemispheric stimulation. So left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain. And what they think, and this is a very sort of like basic overview, because I'm certainly not a neuroscientist, but essentially what they think is that the bilateral stimulation of the brain mimics REM state sleep and dreaming. And we know that that is kind of the body's natural healing response to trauma. And what REM state sleep and dreaming does superficially, it does lots of things, but one of the things it does is it takes somatic memories, so memories that are stored in the body, and it transfers them into, I mean, from a cognitive psychologist point of view, my background is psychology, it transfers these kind of body memories into episodic memories. So they go from being, this is happening to me now, to this is a narrative of what once happened to me. And
so is that the movement that you're sort of looking for? So
that's how we reprocess information.
Reprocess.
Yeah. Unfortunately, our body's natural reprocessing gets interrupted when there are very high levels of cortisol present, which is a stress hormone, right?
Right.
So when we get very stressed, so when our ability to cope with the situation is outmatched by our resources that we have, our body becomes flooded with cortisol, and this seems to have an impact on how we process. And this is why they think trauma gets kind of locked in the body. So kind of very Peter Levine, body keeps the score.
Body keeps the score.
Yeah. So Bessel van der Kolk, polyvagal. Yeah. So Deb Dana. So all of these people have been hugely influential in my practice and also in my own healing journey too. So if we can get people stable using EMDR, we stand a better chance of being able to offer these treatments out to more people, which I think has got to be a good thing.
Definitely.
The other thing is that EMDR is an exposure therapy, right? So people have to re-experience in order to reprocess. And once you get into the memory network, it's Groffian inner healing intelligence. We call it adaptive information processing, but the body knows what it needs to do to heal. So it's like opening up a network and off you go.
So it leads you there.
It leads you there. And
incredible, really, isn't it?
It's incredible. It really is. And Shapiro has got a very sort of manualized way of dealing with that, which of course for people who have got complexity and trauma profiles, having manualized interventions is a very safe way of working with that complexity, because you just follow the protocol. And it's very client led once you get into reprocessing. So you kind of set someone up, send them on their way, and then from there on it's just go with that, right. Feel that, lean into that. So it's about non-directive.
Finding the initial way in.
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of refer, it's like a portal. You just need to find like the most emotionally salient aspect of whatever it is that is blocking them, or what they're looping with in their trauma, and we go with that. And what we notice too in EMDR and with trauma focused interventions is that trauma tends to have a stacking effect, right? So let me explain. Like the thing that happened to you informs the next thing that happens, which informs the next thing, and so it stacks on top of each other. So this is, again, we can go with Freudian perspective, but this is why childhood experiences are so important, and getting to the root node of these issues so often brings us back to these critical attachment windows, that kind of relational blueprint stuff that happens in certainly the first 10 years, but arguably the kind of the first 7 years, or if you can go back to the pre-verbal, or arguably if you take the Groffian stance to the perinatal and the womb experiences,
in the womb,
and then arguably intergenerationally. So again, we can all the way back to the transpersonal, or from the science loving part of me, it's the epigenetic. So how do we heal the trauma of our ancestors, and EMDR has tools for that. We can do EMDR on introjected ancestral parts within you. So Greg, I could say, what was that like for you as your grandmother? Okay, tap on that and off you go, and then you are kind of processing it on her behalf, but through you. Which is, it's like shamanic.
Well, it sort of sounds a little bit like family systems constellation, or family constellations, in terms of like there's a group of people who are representative of kind of historical aspects of the person who's kind of holding the who's got an issue or whatever.
Yeah, or the culture too, and
Oh, the
cultural
culture,
trauma.
right.
Yeah. There's some the book that I've just finished reading was My Grandmother's Hands. Forgive me, I can't remember the name of the author, but we'll put it in the notes.
Yeah.
But a wonderful book, and again, really, I think we can't ignore cultural and intergenerational trauma if we're going to heal our hearts and minds and bodies of this stuff. So yeah, I mean, there seems to be a good overlap. The other thing...
overlap in terms of psychedelics.
Psychedelics, yeah. And the other thing with EMDR, of course, is that because it's an exposure therapy, it's good just to kind of tolerance test. If someone can't... If someone can't emotionally cope with processing using EMDR, then psychedelics are going to be...
Too much.
Yeah.
So there's something about working with people in preparation,
but also arguably dosing as well. So we're looking at psycholytic therapy.
Oh yeah. So talking doing
whilst,
therapy whilst on the substance. Yeah.
So we are. I mean, this is sort of a bit tongue in cheek, but also not. We are thinking about kind of launching MDMA-DR, EMDMA-DR.
I was going to ask you about MDMA because from what I can hear, the way that you're describing it, it kind of sounds like MDMA trauma-focused therapy in terms of
that's certainly one
we can
thing.
go nearer our traumas when we're on that substance. And
it's certainly possible during dosing, and it's also a wonderful integration tool too. Recently did a talk at Breaking Convention back in April, and
down in Exeter. Well, they've launched the course.
They have indeed.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
First psychedelic sort of focused degree, is it?
I mean, I'm not sure. I think it's a postgrad, but
I'll have a look on the show. It'll be in the show notes.
Glad to hear it. In there I co-present with Hannah, my dear colleague, using EMDR as an integration tool, and we can show how the adaptive information emerges as someone processes using this bilateral stimulation, and how you can kind of really drill into that using EMDR sort of attachment informed and standard protocol techniques. So check it out on YouTube.
We'll do. You've got a talk on there.
It's on there.
I mean, it sounds fascinating. There's finding all these kind of different models and actually following a model that speaks to you and that you work with, and then a kind of another model coming in, and then how you're kind of integrating those. So I
mean, in terms of my own practice, EMDR is definitely aligned with psychodynamic theory, which is my core modality, because of the kind of the link to childhood. So those are really well aligned.
So that's the sort of definition of psychodynamic therapy, is like everything's rooted back in...
Well, it's unconscious.
History.
That Freudian would say, Freudian school. I mean, different schools think different things, but Freudian school would be that it's kind of unconscious process based on early experience.
Right.
Obviously, kind of bringing in Jung. There's kind of more.
We know
spirituality,
more, but there's a sort of place to begin.
There's a place to start. It's the grandfather of all. But then how it kind of clips together with how else I'm working as well. I suppose the kind of limitations or frustrations at the moment that Hannah and I are kind of trying to tackle in terms of our advocacy of EMDR as a psychedelic therapy is on how difficult it is to get funding for research into therapeutic efficacy. They're throwing money at drug efficacy, and to get therapy efficacy over the line is notoriously difficult. Hence the IAPT model of very limited interventions, but again, in terms of increasing access and participation, is a sort of a necessity.
Wasn't there a big study that came out that was looking at all the models of therapy and was kind of
That's what needs to happen with psychedelic therapy ultimately.
With psychedelic therapy,
but that
right.
hasn't. We're a long way off. I mean, my sense of it, and having spoken to researchers that we're trying to collaborate with at the moment, is that the first therapies that will really be tested are those that are picking up the discourse of adverse drug experiences. So when things go wrong on the trials, therapeutic efficacy for people who have been adversely affected or traumatized from those experiences will be the first that will be kind of tested more rigorously as an effective therapy. And I think trauma focused work such as EMDR has got a really good foundation to be tested on that.
Right.
I think that any of the therapies used as a preparation, dosing and integration therapy to really get them to that, that kind of multi-site, multinational therapy testing is going to be a way off. We're in some talks with one of the academic institutions about hopefully kind of piggybacking on one of the EMDR trials that's going on into
Amazing.
Psychosis, but we don't yet know how far we'll get with that. But certainly that there's some potential for some overlap and some research questions. But
it's quite an exciting place to be, though. That you're kind of start of this thing, this new.
It's a sweet spot.
The sweet spot you were talking about,
yeah.
Right? And that might relate a little bit to purpose, because it's kind of. I mean, I don't know what you think about the word purpose or what it means or whatever. I mean, I just find it quite an interesting sort of lens to look through. But this sweet spot that you've kind of found, is it something? I mean, how do you get there? Is it something that you feel like you had a premonition about something and you've been driven towards it, or is it more that it's unfolding? Or
no, it's certainly from my own lived experiences. Obviously, in order to kind of change career and be a single parent and study, I suppose I've experienced what it is like to be on a low income. Although I recognise that I had privileges such as my education that gave me opportunities that other people who perhaps wouldn't have, and so I suppose seeing the kind of the privilege blinding that goes on in a lot of the psychedelic world, and feeling that there's a need for more diversity, more inclusivity. We need to kind of do better at supporting those people who have a difficult time, and not kind of othering participants who are adversely affected as perhaps having borderline presentations or kind of hidden risk. But actually we need to be from the outset supporting people. I think we can do better, essentially. And so purpose is definitely a big driver behind what I'm doing.
So it's it's aligned to that, doing better, kind of. Within the sort of patient's experience.
I think it's around. I've got some safety loving parts that can see that we could do better. And feeling responsible as a practitioner working in the field, to bring the skills and tools and learning that I have to support people.
Amazing. So there's a sort of sensing into the collective need, and then feeling kind of responsible for that, or that you have. I
don't think it's that altruistic. I think it's. I think it's more based on my own personal experiences, and seeing how what's needed, and seeing the risks that are perhaps being overlooked, and that need to do better.
So I suppose that leads into the IPT quite nicely.
The IPT.
So tell us a little bit about that. So I'm imagining that. So you're saying that the part of the purpose is. These experience is kind of like needing to know to do better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's me personally that needs to do better.
Right, no,
but I
sure,
think
sure.
as a community, we've got the tools
In the
through
psychedelic
trauma,
world.
and also the trauma-informed world.
Right.
I don't think that those two schools have been aligned well enough yet.
Uh-huh.
And the wonderful work that people like Bessel van der Kolk are doing, Mate.
Yeah. Well, he talks about psychedelics, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Ayahuasca.
But how do we really bed in trauma-informed practice in a meaningful way rather than just paying it lip service?
Yeah.
And I think that everyone sort of throws around trauma-informed ways of working without rigorously knowing how to rigorously apply them, and that's what I mean by doing better. It's not
right.
It's not
as a kind of
as a collective, as a field.
Yeah. So the IPT is the Institute of Psychedelic Therapy.
Yes.
And it's run by Maria Papassou and Tim Reed.
That's
right?
correct.
And so what led you to that? Or how is it to be part of that? It's a 2-year depth relational course, is that right?
Yeah, so we're just coming to the end of that 2-year journey. Best group I've ever worked with, and I think the most comprehensive experiential course I've ever been on, which included four sessions. Sorry, I take that back. It was 8 sessions, 4 of which were holotropic breathwork, and 4 psilocybin retreats that were in the Netherlands. So 2 retreats, 2 journeys on each retreat, sitting and being sat for. A life-changing experience that I thoroughly recommend.
So is it actually a training to become a psychedelic sitter, or because it's not a therapy training, is it?
It's not a therapy training. The way that the course has been set up is really to encourage us to be whatever part of the unfolding scene that is emerging, that needs to be occupied. And so in the second year of the course, we we as a cohort have been encouraged to kind of take on a project. It's not compulsory, but it's there's a opportunity to kind of really go into something with depth, with the hope that as a group we'll cover a number of bases. So we've got some wonderful and treasured friends, colleagues. I mean, I kind of see them as my IPT family now. Some who are kind of really pushing the frontiers of ketamine-assisted therapy. There's special interests in palliative care, in ethics, breath work.
So what a community then to be able to...
Such a resource.
Yeah.
And also, the kind of just that depth relational approach which builds on the value of how as a group we've almost become a kind of an organism in our own right, this sort of super organism where we're all playing a different part within the community. So and the shared learning that goes on from that, as well as the inevitability of group process that happens in these.
Absolutely, you can't miss out on that one.
The grittiness of
and you kind of learn so much about yourself in those situations, don't you?
And what a wonderful group of people to share that with.
So you're at a place where you're sort of coming to the end of that, but you've got this EMDR focused kind of research going on as well.
Yeah.
So I can see why that's the sweet spot, because there's kind of like so much potential in that, in these two aspects.
Yeah.
Kind of combining. There's
a synergistic quality. Nice. They are greater than the sum of the two parts. It feels there's a rightness to it.
Yeah. And then of course we've got the psychedelic integration group in Brighton. It's all happening in Brighton. That's where it happens, right? I think I remember bumping into you at the research centre and we were talking about how we need to get a research centre here, because it seems to be where all the researchers are and the practitioners. But that's probably not quite true, but it feels a bit like that.
Yeah, there's certainly there's a good cohort, and I think in part that is because of the early work that was done by Brighton Psychedelic Society with Maria through her kind of information talks, and lovely Dylan Burns, and of course Brighton's got a flowery flowery history when it comes to the party scene as well. So perhaps it's just everything coming together as it needed to.
Yeah, I think you might be right. So, and so I was a part of the psychedelic integration group for a little while, but how's all that going? Is it?
Yeah, it's good. We're currently piloting a kind of teaming up with the Psychedelic Society, so that we can hopefully make it more accessible to more people through better admin. I have to say that admin and marketing is not my strong point.
Why should it be? Hey? There's someone else's purpose it is to do that.
Yeah. I can hold space and I can work therapeutically, but
and that's what it looks like, right? It's kind of like these sharing circles where people bring either come to learn about and hear about people's psychedelic experiences, or come to share their psychedelic experiences and maybe get some feedback, or to hear how that lands with the group.
I think it's that and more. I think that the other thing that is perhaps overlooked in the integration circles is the value of horizontal models of care. So within kind of the biomedical model, we are kind of taught that, we have a kind of a hierarchical approach with consultants and practitioners kind of filtering down their expertise to recipients or patients.
Yes.
And actually, healthcare is kind of in the process of being reformed in order to meet sustainability targets. And part of that means recognising the inherent value of community and the support, peer support that is so beneficial, both in receiving and also in providing. And that kind of, it's not a 12-step group, but that kind of model of horizontal models of care is.
I was going to mention
so
12 steps because it's kind of there's something sort of very healing about that, having a community of people who identify as addicts, right? But I suppose you also get a healing community of people who identify as psychonauts or looking for healing in a community. And
what actually also happens is that the group becomes the kind of the individual. And so, kind of working with that then, it becomes very much like a constellation or an internal family system. And there's something wonderful about seeing, for example, this is just an illustration, but seeing how different participants will kind of almost do a kind of a piece of inner child work, where you have an elder in the group speaking perhaps to a student or vice versa, and something that is kind of mutually healing from providing experiencing and then kind of requesting feedback and obviously the space needs to be held in a way that supports a containing kind of ethos, but really once that kind of those parameters are established, the group kind of does the work itself.
Interesting. So it's kind of more about stepping back but holding
absolutely
the kind of structure.
What
did you call it? Horizontal
models of care.
I like it. That's really nice. Like no hierarchy in terms of we're just disseminating this expertise, rather than it's like no, actually, there's an expertise and an intelligence in this group. So it's up to all of us to tap into that somehow.
And that also, in terms of patient outcomes, patient empowerment is one of the kind of the 4 quality indicators to improve the sustainability of all healthcare. How do we empower patients to make informed decisions for themselves, and part of that is around empowering them to be their own healer rather than kind of a recipient of an expert giving advice.
Wow. So we're sitting here in this lovely, beautiful sort of mid-August
Another
sunny day. We've
spot.
actually got some sunshine in this sweet spot in August. And there's a jar of... What is this in front of me that you've given me?
It's a gift.
It's a gift?
It's a gift.
Oh. It's a jar with like a honeycomb in it.
It is a honeycomb, and
It smells absolutely wonderful.
It came out of the hive this morning. I've been a hobby beekeeper. Although
beekeeper?
I'm not I wouldn't really call myself an expert. So I'm more of an enthusiast, because sometimes I wonder if it's the bees that keep me rather than the other way around. But yeah, it felt there was a rightness in bringing you a gift, and that feels like a
Thank
good
you
thing.
so much. Is this also something that's connected to your purpose in terms of like where's this come from? Like, what made you?
Yeah, I suppose we're kind of on a bit of a theme of groups, aren't we, with the integration circle, horizontal models of care, the IPT course, the group, and it's bees are a wonderful example of a superorganism. A bee doesn't exist on its own as an isolated cell. In fact, if you think about a kind of the mechanics of a beehive, you can liken it to a mammal. Let me explain. So they keep their kind of hive in a sealed, sterile environment, which they plug all the gaps with a substance called propolis, which is like a sap from the tree, which
really
is
good for you, isn't it?
It's got some powerfully antimicrobial, antifungal, antiviral properties. The bees collect it from sap, and then they meticulously seal their hive with it. So it's a sterile internal environment. They've got a low reproductive rate. They only swarm, once, twice in a season. They keep their hive temperature at 37.5 degrees.
Wow.
I mean, they've got a kind of, arguably going perhaps into a Jungian perspective, they've got collective intelligence.
Yeah.
They signal using pheromones, mammals with hormones. They feed their larvae on an excrement of, like we would lactate, but they secrete the substance to feed their young on. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of bees and mammalian.
Yes. Sort of fascinating, because you're right. Yeah, you can look at the whole.
The hive intelligence.
Yeah, the hive intelligence. Oh, well, I suppose that's what people say, isn't it? Hive intelligence.
Yeah.
Like, listen, hive intelligence, can you tell me this? Yeah. I always think of something about bees, which I love, is, well, there's something also about like the relationship between a bee and a flower, right? It's not just like the bee kind of going, all right, I'm just going to take it's like the flowers.
Well, they co-evolved. They co-evolved around 30 million years ago, right?
Wow.
Or it might have been a little bit earlier, but we're talking about honeybees as they've existed. I mean, if you think about that in human terms, we've only been bipedal for 2 million years. So they've got sort of a 28 million year head start on us.
Right.
And if you look at how they've evolved into this kind of superorganism where different individuals have got different roles within the hive. We've got kind of nurse bees and the guard bees, and you've got the foragers, and so I think humans can learn a lot from these kind of archaic species.
Yeah.
And
so wow. So I can just spread this like immediately on my toast, can I?
You ought to dip your finger in it first.
Dip your finger in it.
Like now, give it a go.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because the actual hive, it's like the actual hexagons.
Yeah.
Incredible. So it's nice and soft. It feels like it could be
and also
it's delicious as well.
and I suppose it's a bit like single origin chocolate, the way that I keep my bees is it's an approach called sustainable beekeeping. So I don't medicate them, and I don't use methods of swarm control. So they swarm each season, which is always
and where's this
chaos making.
Home?
Yeah, in the garden.
Oh.
And a bit like single origin chocolate, like, if you take a little bit of comb, just as and when the bees can spare it. So this stuff came off the lid of like the hive. If you just take a little at a time, each time of the year will have just a subtly different flavour, because it's different flowers.
Yeah, what's going on in your garden?
Exactly. So like single origin chocolate, you get like a whole kind of cacophony of different types of honey at different times of the year, which is quite cool. So I think at the moment it's quite floral because it's August. And
does that make you want to kind of like change up your gardening every year so you can get different floral textures in your honey?
They go out about sort of 3 to 10 miles.
3 to 10
I don't
miles?
Think,
so it's not just
it's not
going
to be
no. Okay. Wow, 3 to 10 miles.
Yeah, they've got quite a range depending on.
Wow, it's been fascinating to talk to you. What What next for you? I mean, it sounds like you're still in the middle of this research, but I mean, where are you being pulled and drawn to, like a bee to a flower?
Yeah, looking for the sweet nectar. That's a really good question. Yeah, I think that for me, probably social justice stuff around psychedelic therapy is probably where I'll kind of gravitate to.
Yeah.
So widening participation, making it more accessible to more people, particularly to the people who need it most. And yeah, I'm aware that, you know, that's a bit of kind of activism stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's what is driving me at the moment.
Yeah. So you'll come to the end of the course and see where that sort of drives you. You've been doing some talks for Breaking Convention, so I imagine you've got a few more.
Well,
talks
also in
up.
terms of not just talks, I've Hannah and I are co-authoring a book.
Yes.
So we should put that in the notes at some point as well. Yeah, thanks.
Is it out yet? Or?
It's not. No, we're hoping.
So this is like a
we're hoping to publish in 2024.
Okay.
We've got a publishing contract with Routledge, so we're cracking on with that.
Amazing.
So thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and really, I suppose seeing where that partnership takes me, because Hannah and I mean, we only met through the IPT reasonably recently, but as soon as we got together, we've just geeked out ever since.
You found another geek.
Geek out basically. Yeah. And that's really emerging into something quite special. So whether that be co-writing or kind of retreats or kind of intellectual research stuff in terms of trying to demonstrate efficacy. I don't yet know, but we've certainly got a number of plates spinning.
It sounds like you've got options, and actually maybe it's more about just trusting where to go
and
with it.
I'm certainly not an expert in EMDR or in psychedelics, but I am an enthusiast, and so I think taking that role of not knowing, move things forward.
I've lived my whole life like that. Be an amateur.
Yeah.
I mean, amateurs gets a bad name, because it's like, oh, you're an amateur, but actually it's kind of like beginner's mind.
It is beginner's mind, and recognising that, there are some people with really wonderful specialisms out there, and how do we put those individuals in contact with each other, and how do we kind of work together to support systemic change, and that's the bit that I feel really passionate about, and I think that community collaboration, communication, those are going to be integral to really kind of to really kind of bedding in these medicines and moving it forward in a meaningful way so that they can actually help more people.
Well, that's really lovely to hear, and it's been fascinating talking to you. And also thank you for the work you're doing, because this is just really needed work, and obviously it drives you as well, so it's kind of beneficial to you and to the people it's going to serve, and
another privilege, it's
and
like,
another privilege.
I really recognize that, and I suppose in terms of you giving thanks to me, I'm so tremendously grateful to the many people who have kind of supported me to get to where I am now, from kind of people babysitting for me so that I could go to university and retrain, or people who are kind of in the third sector kind of supporting that kind of process, or colleagues and people with words of encouragement, to dear Tim and Maria for kind of making the IPT happen, and
incredible
putting
work.
me in contact with Han. Like it kind of feels like I mean, Jung might call it synchronicity, but there's something that has brought me to this place, and I'm now just able to find value and meaning from the experiences that I once had. Doing this work makes all that meaningful.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
It's such a pleasure.
Thank you to Jocelyn. What a great conversation. Really enjoyed that. Oh my God, we just covered so many topics, and really enjoyed sitting down. And you can kind of hear the seagulls in the background, reminding me of that kind of wonderful summer vibe in my flat in Brighton. So thanks, Joss. Really look forward to reading Joss's book as well. And I don't think it's got a title yet, but I'm going to be watching out for the release of that, hopefully in 2024. And thanks for the honey, Joss. Absolutely divine. Thank you so much. So, as I said at the beginning of the episode, I have got a new project going on. So, at the end of last year, some friends of mine and a little group of us gathered, and we decided that we wanted to start putting on sweat lodges. If you've not heard of sweat lodges, I mean, they don't sound that appealing, do they? Going into a lodge and sweating. I mean, they're kind of amazing. They're amazing sort of paganistic, I suppose the American Indians or the Aboriginal people of America are famous for it. They're sitting in these hot lodges that are made out of kind of flexible wood, and what you do is we go in, we cover them up with blankets and tarps and canvases, and make the lodge really dark, so when you're in there you can't see anything. And then after a few hours of heating up these special rocks that Rupert, Alex and myself went to collect from Wales, we put them into the lodge, and then we start pouring water on them, and you do about 2 or 3, maybe 4 rounds of intentional, one round might be like just doing a body massage, and the next one might be like intentions for your life, and another one is like what you want to let go of. And it's very intense, kind of ritualistic approach to to ground yourself and to cleanse yourself, you know. And that's what I really love about the sweat lodges, because it's not a kind of therapy group. You know, you don't sort of share about your childhood and what made you like you are and this and that. You really, because of the heat, you just have to say what you want to say, and then you get next person says what they need to say, and you get around, and then you all jump out for a while and sit around the fire, and then you go back in and do it all over again. So it's a beautiful thing. And anyway, we've got something more regular in the calendar now. So if any of you feel tempted to come down or get involved, you can read about it. You can join our Facebook page, Wild Lodge, WLYD. I think that's the pagan spelling. And we're called Wild Lodge. So come and like our page. I think we've got a group as well. It's very, very confusing on Facebook. They've got a group and a page. Anyway, we've got both of them, and you're very welcome to come join them. And we're going to be running sweat lodges throughout the year. We're going to do the 8 points of the calendar in bulk, the solstices. What's the other one called? Lamashun? Lamashun? No, it can't be Lamashun. Lamashun is a Turkish bread, isn't it? We're going to be doing a special Turkish bread sweat lodge just for you. And we also plan to do some other sweat lodges for private groups. Anyone that feels like they would like to find some connection in their community or work, you know, maybe more corporate sweat lodge. That doesn't sound quite right, does it? A corporate sweat lodge? I can just imagine people sitting there in suits and laptops, sweating. Anyway, I'd love you to come and get involved if you're interested. It's all very hippy-dippy and paganistic and shamanic. And if you like a bit of that stuff, then come along. I mean, the other way to look at it is, you know, it's also just really cleansing. Like, if you like going and sitting in a sauna, then you'll probably like sitting in a sweat lodge, so you can feel your organs cooking. Yes, sounds appetizing, doesn't it? So come along to that if you fancy it. The other little bit of exciting news I have for you is that the next few episodes are going to kind of wander away from the usual structure. I had the pleasure of interviewing my friend Adam Malone, who is one of the directors of Breaking Convention, the largest psychedelic conference in Europe. maybe even the world. No, in Europe. Anyway, sat down to talk to Adam, and the conversation just went down a rabbit hole, and I realised that we were going in a different direction. And so the next episode might even be 2 episodes, because honestly, Adam is like a raconteur. He went off down the rabbit hole, and I just let him go. And hopefully that will be a fascinating conversation. I haven't edited the episode yet, but I will get around to it. And that reminds me, in the future, I may be setting up a Patreon. Is it called a Patreon or a Patreon account? Because I really want to do more of these podcasts, and I really want to do it. Get more people involved, and I want to interview more people and get it on a more regular basis. So I'm going to set up a Patreon account so you can buy me a coffee, or you can buy me a lunch, or you can buy me a swimming pool. No, or you can just not do that, and you can just listen, and that is absolutely fine as well. So I'll be looking into how to do that and setting up links and the rest of it. So that's cool. In the meantime, if you have any feedback, positive, negative, comments, whatever, anything you want to let me know, or anything touched you or resonated with you in any of the episodes, please do drop me a line at gregory.donaldson@gmail.com. gregory.donaldson@gmail.com. I'd love to hear any feedback that I can then bring a section of that into the podcast and give a little feedback and comments section. Okay, so thanks for listening. Hope you're doing all right out there. If you're not, try and get out, get some light when you can. And when you can't do that, lie in bed and listen to the Emerging Purpose podcast. I love you. See you soon. Take care.